the Democrats in the Minnesota House of Representatives did what we need to do to pass our agenda. We, in the 23-24 biennium, had the most successful and productive legislative session in 50 years. It is definitely the second Minnesota miracle. Building on the work that we did last year, we finished up this year with some more gun violence prevention and important work investing in children and families. We had really unprecedented delays in the floor business over the last 3 weeks. Really, I think any of you who are following the work of the Minnesota House or the Minnesota Senate noted that there was ample time to debate every single measure that was brought up. At 9:45 tonight, I met with Minority Leader Lisa Dameth. I told her exactly what we were doing. I told her exactly which bills would be in the conference committee report, and indicated to her that we needed to put all these bills in the tax conference committee report because otherwise we couldn't be assured that we would get done due to the unprecedented delays. And I offered to continue to work with her. If there was some way over the next hour and a half we could, in regular order, get all of the work done, we would have certainly been happy to do that. Senator Murphy and I have been working to negotiate a bonding bill and an end-of-session agreement with Leader Dameth and Leader Johnson for several weeks, and their requirement for us to work together was that we not do any of the things that Minnesotans sent us to St. Paul to do, that we not take any actions to invest in children and families, that we not take any actions to protect reproductive freedom, or take any actions regarding gun violence prevention. And we were simply not willing to forego our values and what we ran on and what we got elected on to try to reach some kind of a deal with Republicans on a construction bill. Senator Murphy.
Speaker Hortman. It is morning, isn't it? We were here in the small hours of the morning yesterday, finishing up our work, listening to long debates, speeches by our Republican colleagues in the Senate. I took a bit of a break in the office with the lights down, and I was trying to get a little shut-eye, but I couldn't stop smiling. It kept me awake, actually, thinking about what we'd accomplished at the end of a very long day yesterday in making sure that drivers for Uber and Lyft and ride shares were going to continue in Minnesota. That was the result of 2 years of hard work by many, many people. And there is nothing more satisfying in this work than to realize that you've achieved something important for the people you've come to represent. Tonight, at the end of a really long debate, a noisy one, my ears are still ringing, one of our colleagues in the minority, used his voice to make sure that we didn't pass a bonding bill. The bonding bill came to us late, but we lost it by about 30 seconds. If you follow the rules, it can't pass midnight. There was one member who was loud and interruptive, and so we lost a bonding bill for the people of Minnesota as a result. I am very, very proud of the work that we have done over the last 2 years, and our caucus has had many challenges, and at the end of this session, I think it's important to recognize the person who came before me, Leader Carrie Dietzick. She set for us a course and a model that has been important for us, in that we know when we stick together, we can get important work done for the people of Minnesota. And I think in our institutions, we have more work to do, maybe fresh work to do, to make sure that all of us are bringing our very best to the work, rather than trying to stop progress, rather than trying to stop legislation. I want to work with my legislative colleagues across the aisle to bring their best voices to the policymaking. That is what is the measure of bipartisanship. I think that's what people want, but we're not seeing it expressed in the last number of years in the legislature. And if we see it expressed again, we're going to continue to invest in the people of Minnesota, in communities across the state, and to build a future for people. That's why we're here. And tonight, that's what we accomplished. And with that, I'll turn it to Jamie Long.
Thank you so much. I think we have an enormous amount to be proud of this session for all that we were able to accomplish. And the bill that we passed off last from the floor contained some of our highest priorities of the session. It contained a permitting reform bill that Senator Fritz and I worked really hard on. That's a follow-up to our 100% clean energy bill from last year. It included medical debt reform to make sure that we are helping people afford their lives, and it included expanded child tax credit. This is a model for the entire country from what we're able to do to help reduce childhood poverty. It included, as Leader Murphy mentioned, the rideshare drivers provisions, which we've worked very hard on for 2 years, and it included gun violence prevention to build on the work that we did last session. These priorities are Minnesotans' priorities, and they were the Minnesotans who sent us into office to govern and to make sure that we were standing up for their beliefs and their values. And we had this week some really extraordinary roadblocks put in our way to be able to get our work done. Certainly in the Senate as well as the House, we had an 8-hour filibuster on a bill that passed in a bipartisan way to stop junk fees. We had an 8-hour filibuster on a paid family medical leave technical fix bill that was longer than the original debate that we had on that bill when we first passed it. And today we saw again roadblock after roadblock put in the way of getting our work done. So we did get our work done, and the Minnesota people will be better for it. The bills that we passed both today and over the last 2 years are going to change the state for the better, going to help people afford their lives, going to improve civil rights for Minnesotans, going to fight our climate crisis, and I think we can be incredibly proud of the session that we've had.
Speaker Hortman, Lisa Damuth said that she quoted you from, I think, 6 years ago, that huge bills like this should not happen and you would never allow that to happen. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, the big difference is the bill Omnibus Prime that Representative Kurt Doubt put on the floor was one that nobody had any idea what was in it. These were bills that had Republicans on the conference committees that had all been heard. There were not a lot of creative writing in conference committee that followed the rules. And the Republicans were on the conference committee. So in many of these cases, they were conference committee reports that had been debated for hours and hours. In fact, one of the ingredients in there was the agriculture and energy bill, which we spent hours and hours debating. So they knew exactly what was in the bills. They also knew exactly what they were doing when they spoke for hours and hours on things and told stories about their families, didn't talk about the bills at all. It was a deliberate effort to block progress, and we had to take extraordinary measures, which are authorized by the rules, to pass the bills.
They claim that things could have been airdropped in. They have no idea what was in that bill. They were having to take your word for it without being able to look at it.
We gave them every opportunity to work with us in a reasonable bipartisan way, and instead, what they did was obstruct the work of the legislature, and that just cannot be permitted.
Are you worried at all about the optics of what went down tonight?
Well, it's funny because Senator Murphy and I have been in the legislature for a long time, and we've lived through this before. We had a very obstructionist Republican minority in the Minnesota House from 2007 to 2010, and former Speaker Margaret Anderson Kelleher had to move the previous question several times to get bills through. So we lived through that.
We have.
Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Dear Callahan.
Can I read from you a tweet that went out today? As a former Senate Minority Leader, it saddens me to witness the erosion of this institution. The minority must always have a voice in the legislative process. May we find the courage to work together to restore the public trust in that of each other. That was Melissa Lopez Franson. That's a DFL, former DFL Minority Leader.
And my friend and colleague. We use the word bipartisanship a lot. And we call a lot of things that are narrow in their bipartisanship, one Democratic vote, one Republican vote, bipartisanship. And I think in the best spirit, if we are participating together, listening to each other, sitting on committees together, people's preferences are included in legislation, we are working in a bipartisan fashion for the people of Minnesota. Much of the work that has been put into law or will be signed into law is exactly that. So there's a difference between what we describe and perhaps what we feel and what we do. I can't imagine that if you were in the legislature every day in the Minnesota Senate like I have been, that you would think that the minority's voice was silenced. It's not been. In fact, I think we're talking a lot about the length of the minority's voice, in some ways, in an effort to block progress. That's also not right. I don't like it when we get to the end of session and experience what we experienced tonight. I don't think anybody does. Our first-term members, they didn't enjoy that. I don't think our senior members enjoyed that. But nor do we like or appreciate when people use hours and hours of repetitive debate and repetitive questioning to slow the debate down. They're both barriers to the work that we need to do for the people of Minnesota.
This damages relations between the two parties in the future, in sessions to come. I mean, does this set a precedent?
I'm not worried about that because legislative leaders know that at the end of the session, the work needs to get done. There's some pretty bumpy landings when Speaker Kurt Doubt was the speaker, definitely some bumpy landings when Margaret Anderson Kelleher was the speaker, and I had to do what I had to do to get the bills across the finish line. What I'm disappointed in, and I think all of us are, is that the Republicans engaged in the conduct that they did. It's deeply disrespectful to the institution to engage in the kind of delay tactics that they did. They took advantage of the goodwill of the speaker. I always adjourn at midnight. The poor Senate was here till I think 5 a.m. on Monday going into Tuesday, I think till 5 a.m. Wednesday going into Thursday, and again around the clock on Friday. And they knew that I would leave at midnight. So they tried to block as many things as they could from happening by talking as long as they could. That kind of obstructionism is not pursuant to the rules at all. And that's why we had to use the tools to end it.
But you guys have entire control of state government. Couldn't you have passed some of these bills sooner? And yes, the Republicans could have filibustered as long as the day is long, but you still control the clock at the end of the day.
These filibusters were extraordinary. They are all out of proportion to the amount of debate that has happened in the past. There was plenty of time to do this the right way. The Republicans chose that this is how the legislature would end, by taking the time that they did on the measures we had on the floors.
But the Senate had a delay that you called, Senator Murphy, on Saturday. That was 10 hours. You could have passed some of these bills. So it's not entirely the Republicans here, right?
As I've spoken to you before, we used that time on Saturday to create a compromise that resulted in one of the priorities for this legislative session, the rideshare legislation. It was important for Minnesota that we get that right, and we spent our time doing that. And if you're a creature of the legislature or spend any time here, you know that there will be work happening in the chambers, there will be work happening in committees, and there'll be work with members who are trying to find solutions to difficult problems. That's what we chose to do yesterday, and it resulted in something really important for the people of Minnesota.
Did the
Well, I think
rideshare
the
bill
last
kind
2
of
days
take
to
on
pass
an
all these
outsized-
bills.
Did the rideshare bill take on kind of an outsized role compared to what millions of Minnesotans
Why
are
don't we-
interested in?
Why don't we hear the question here and then go to that, Michelle?
Why wait the last 2 days to pass all these bills?
Part of how we got there was the Republican filibusters over the last 3 weeks. To be honest, I think you saw it very clearly that when certain incidents happened with regard to the Senate, the Republicans decided that they were entitled to co-govern. That is not how majority and minority control of the bodies works. There's an election, there's a majority party, there's a minority party. If we were to run every single measure by them, we would not have done permitting reform. We would not have done gun violence prevention. We would not have protected reproductive freedom. So it's completely unrealistic for the Republicans to put a standard out there that they would be driving state legislature.
Along the same lines, the minority leader in the Senate kept saying that if you guys hadn't stuck with Nicole Mitchell, Senator Mitchell in the Senate, that they would have worked with you and got a lot of the stuff passed anyway. Do you buy that, or how do you respond to that, I guess?
The experiences and the incidents with Senator Mitchell is serious, and we've taken it incredibly seriously in the Minnesota Senate. She deserves due process, and the people who elected her deserve her representation. They have a right to that. So I think our Republican colleagues chose to essentially become judge and jury and use that incident, that experience, for political purposes. And it did serve to slow us down. We are taking that matter very seriously. We understand that she deserves and has a right to due process. And she also had the responsibility to represent the people of Woodbury in the legislature, and she did that.
Could you have avoided calling the question without the 10-hour recess on Saturday, or would that not have even been enough time?
There was no way, so I mean, I think you all observed this process. Bills have to pass the House and the Senate in order to get to the governor's desk. And the delays on both sides, the House and the Senate, prevented us. So the House sent a bunch of bills to the Senate sent a bunch of bills to the House, but because of delays in the other body, we weren't able to get through both of those. I do want to comment on Representative Hauser. Tom, it's just like a habit. Tom Hauser's question about Uber and Lyft. I think that did have outsized importance in the legislative session this year because it was so important. The city of Minneapolis took an action. The company said that they would leave. We were all deeply committed to ensuring that the drivers get fair pay and that they're treated fairly by the companies, but also to ensure that they stayed in Minnesota so they could serve the people of Minnesota. So that was an important issue for our state's economy, and I think it took the time that it took to solve.
But wasn't that kind of self-inflicted? It was the Minneapolis City Council, the Republicans have made the point that they kind of forced this on you and then you followed.
So what gave rise to the need to solve this problem was that Uber and Lyft don't pay their drivers fairly. So right there, we had a study that was done by the state that showed that they are paid below minimum wage, and that was a challenge that we needed to solve. The Minneapolis City Council did us a great service by putting this on our plate and making sure that we were taking it seriously and going to get it done this year, and we did. We got a great result for drivers with a 20% pay increase, best health insurance in the country, and this is going to help a lot of people live better lives.
Even though it may have contributed to some of this chaos at the end by delaying other things or pushing other things?
We had an agreement with companies, with the governor, with the House and the Senate, so there was no reason for the Republicans to have any opposition to the agreement that we reached.
What's next for the, go ahead. What's next for the Equal Rights Amendment?
Advocates are calling for a special session.
I think that would be unlikely. We can certainly speak with the governor about that, but I think what's next for the Equal Rights Amendment from the House perspective is we have an election. We are all going out and running for re-election, and the next legislature will address this issue. I do think it was really important that the Senate sent it to the House last year, which elevated the issue. We worked all through the summer and fall to get language that could be agreed to in the House and the Senate, so we wouldn't have to have those 15-hour debates multiple times. So we wanted a proposal that would be the same as it went through the House and the Senate, and so we worked very hard to try to get agreement on that. But I think what we did is we moved the cause forward. Many of the things we do at the legislature take like a decade or two to get done. And so I think in the last 2 years, we've moved light years in getting the ERA closer to the ballot in Minnesota.
I'd just like to follow up on that, Madam Speaker, and also ask Leader Murphy about that. If you retain your majority in the Minnesota House of Representatives, can you guarantee Minnesotans that this issue will be moved forward? And that I have the same question for you, Leader Murphy. Then if they move it forward there, are you going to, you said you needed more time, so is 2025 enough time then to get it on the ballot in 2026?
So I said I needed more time, meaning I needed more time today, or maybe yesterday.
I understand.
The author of the legislation in the Minnesota Senate is Senator Kunish, who's right over here in ERA Green. And she's already talked about the work she intends to do to make sure that this remains an issue before us as we head into 2025. So I would expect that we'll continue to do the work that has already been conducted to make sure that Minnesotans understand they'll have a choice of a modern-day ERA before them and on the ballot in the future.
Madam Speaker is going to be on the campaign trail. Is this something you're going to be going to be telling Minnesotans, hey, give us the majority again, and you're going to see some progress on this.
I'm sure for some campaigns, that will be something they talk about. As to predicting the future, we'll have to see the new personnel who come to work at the Minnesota House of Representatives.
I think Dave has
Dave.
a question. Thank you, everybody. Are you worried that the spectacle of tonight might overshadow the content of what's in those bills?
I am not worried about that. I've been here for 20 years. I have seen this spectacle at many endings of legislative sessions. I'm sure you all file your stories early. Deadlines are the nature of how things get done, so there's always a lot of activity at the end of session. And when a minority is especially obstructive, the majority has no choice but to use these tactics, and has on many occasions in the past.
But remember that the work that we've done is going to last for generations. So the spectacle will fade, but the work will remain.
Was there any thought that you could just not put it in this tax omnibus and work with the governor and do a brief special session? Why not go that route to complete what you maybe had left to do?
We would have been in the same situation. We actually talked through that today, because what would happen in a special session, every bill has to have 3 different readings in the House and the Senate. So it would have been multiple days to get first, second, and third readings, and we would have been back exactly in the same position we were today, which is Republicans talking for a very long time to prevent us from passing bills. So whether we did it today or whether we did it a week from now in special session, the Republicans chose this course. They chose this path for the ending of the legislature, and it would have happened this way either way.
There's nothing you all could have done to avoid the chaotic finish.
We
It was all
tried.
on the Republicans.
We tried everything we could to prevent it, and, I would have liked to have seen it end differently. Certainly, we could have done things earlier in the session, but I think that the unprecedented filibusters by the Republicans were the primary cause of what happened today.
But you passed a lot more controversial stuff you passed a lot more stuff last year, and it didn't end like this. What was the difference?
The filibusters. I mean, the funny thing was, we were doing little technical corrections to paid family medical leave, and the debate was longer than when we passed the program. Last year, the Republicans did not engage in this behavior.
Well, on the Senate floor particularly, I think that the way this ended in terms of the decorum melting down is unprecedented in modern times, certainly, and in my time here, certainly. Well, that's about a 30-year run. Was that caused by some loose cannon members, or is it a more general frustration that means that perhaps you would want to involve the minority in different ways to avoid it, I guess, degenerating that way, for lack of a better term?
As I said before, there are relationships among members, Democrats and Republicans. There is functioning working relationships among members, Democrats and Republicans. Maybe not so evident, but it is present, and it serves the people of Minnesota well. I don't think that's what's broken. I think it is, and I've served many times in the minority and the majority, and it took me a while to learn what my role was in the minority, and it wasn't to just stop everything. It was to figure out how to work with the people who had more power than I did, and to persuade them to carry the things that I thought were important. That takes relational skills. And if I choose instead to say, I don't like what you represent, so I'm going to use my voice and my power and my time to just stop you, well, you're stopping something you don't like, but you're not advancing something for Minnesotans. That's what's changing. That's the thing we need to change back.
Speaker Hortman, on Thursday, you said that the Senate had the votes to pass the ERA with the House language. Were you trying to force the Senate's hand on that? Because that clearly was not true.
No, I believe that the Senate did have the votes, and because that was my condition for taking it up on the floor and spending the 15 hours that we did, was I had to have a pretty good sense that the Senate would be able to take it up and pass it. And I think, part of what happened this week, it deprived the Senate of the opportunity, the time to have that conversation. It wasn't just the conduct in the Senate that prevented the Senate the opportunity to talk about that bill. It was that it took us so long to get it out of the House.
Straw purchasers made it into this omnibus, right?
Job purchasers and binary triggers, yes.
But the sports betting is not in that bill, correct? No.
It's not.
I mean, I think you have majority votes for budget bills, and there's a majority vote for sports betting, but there's not an overlap. That's a different vote total.
And the cash for bonding bill did not pass because it was 30 or so seconds past, correct?
That's right.
Do you think there needs to be an overhaul for the rules of the Senate and House debate? Some kind of time limits, or, I mean, it's just, when I heard the word filibuster in relation to the House, that didn't compute for me immediately, because in other legislatures I've been in, it's not the case, so.
One of the pieces of work that didn't make it across the line this year was the work of reforming our rules in the Minnesota Senate. And it was a long and arduous process, and something we'll take up at the start of next session. We have been reluctant to adopt things like time limits, and perhaps it's after this experience, we'll have to come back to that question.
Hope to have time for one more.
So just to answer that question from the House perspective, so Peter Callahan asked me this earlier in the week, after the 2 filibusters that I was referencing earlier, and we are out of the norm. We are out of the mainstream in Minnesota. The National Conference of State Legislators, when they came and did a study of our rules, called it the Wild West. And that's because it is. We have enormous opportunity for the minority to have a voice, to influence the process, and frankly, to delay the process. So I personally do think that it's time for us to have time limits. I think that would avoid having us be in these positions, because the minority has an incentive to use every single tool they have to block progress. And that's what I think Senator Murphy was referring to. So if you have rules set up that can allow bad behavior, then that bad behavior is going to happen. But if you have rules that say we're going to 8 p.m., you'll go to 8 p.m.
Just, do you think there's more bad behavior happening because there's a change in the dynamics between the DFL and Republicans? Or do you think that the political climate's changing and it requires this, and maybe there's less decorum or politeness than there used to be, or?
No doubt about it, the legislature is a reflection of society, and you've seen a real coarsening of debate in the time that I've served here, from when the Tea Party came in 2010 to when the Trump supporters came in 2016. It's just been a coarsening, and where we used to have debates of, you feel a certain way about a minimum wage, and I feel a certain way about a minimum wage, we now have people kind of screaming at us of like, you don't understand what you're doing, and you want to hurt people, and you want to kill business. There's a much more mean-spirited flavor to the debate, and it makes it harder to reach across party lines. If you're talking about there's different ways to look at a minimum wage from different economic theories, you can maybe find common ground. But when you refer to people with different opinions than you as people who are bad people or stupid, we definitely did hear a lot of that over the last 3 weeks. It makes it harder to bridge the differences. That being said, the vast majority of the bills that we passed this year were bipartisan. It was a very bipartisan work. There are bipartisan measures in almost all of these bills that we passed.
Madam Speaker, you mentioned the coarsening of the debate. Is Donald Trump exacerbating that situation?
I think so. I mean, we have social norms, and he has moved the social norms. We have seen people who are racist and sexist who kept that under wraps for decades, and he green-lighted that behavior publicly. When we came into the minority and I became the minority leader in 2016, we felt that it was an important part of our duty as a caucus to point out the misogyny, the racism that we were seeing. We didn't have any power to stop what the Republicans were doing, but we could point out the degradation of the social norms.
Thank you, everybody.
You regret removing the
There were seconds when I did.